It's time now for the 360 round, so let's bring in our panel to discuss the latest in the streaming sector. Joining us are Dan Rayburn, streaming media analyst, and Seth Schachner, the managing director at Strat Americas. Thank you both for being with us. Seth, let's start with you. I want to kick things off just with the rumors and the reports of this potential deal between Paramount Skydance and Warner Brothers Discovery, and how you think that could potentially change the landscape in terms of streaming.
Sure. I mean, it's been rumored, so I don't think there's been anything that's been, kind of officially announced. But the thinking is that when Ellison bought Paramount, which was, kind of a long, exasperating process to begin with, that they were not going to be satisfied with just one studio. And so, what has been bandied about, in the press out here in Hollywood, is something that's close to an all-cash bid for Warner's assets that would preempt some of Warner's plans that they announced, Warner Discovery, to kind of split off those TV assets. And I think there's some private equity getting involved, but with Ellison family money largely. And these are two companies that are pretty different in terms of size and market cap. And if it were to happen, it would be a very, very compelling merged entity, in my view, in terms of the landscape competitively. It'd be a real threat to Netflix. And I'm for sure this one would get plenty of regulatory scrutiny for a lot of reasons, in terms of losing buyers and news being under one house, a couple networks. But yeah, I think would be a big response to Hollywood studios' need to get larger to compete for talent, for programming against Netflix, essentially. But still something that's just been bandied about.
And Dan, I'd like to come over to you for the same question here too. What are your thoughts on if this comes to fruition and becomes a reality? Right now, just reports and rumors. How does that change the bigger picture of the industry?
Well, there's no way to say. We just don't have enough information. Everybody's speculating right now, and besides the regulatory issues, we don't know what will be acquired. We don't know what type of content they would get. We don't know if they bundle services together. There's just too many unknowns. So it's interesting the industry is speculating about so many deals right now that have not actually taken place, and we don't even know if they're going to happen. But it's too early for anybody to say. We would need actual details.
All right. So with that said, one thing we do have actual details on is David Ellison has been very clear about how important sports are for his view of Paramount Skydance, and how important live event streaming is, and that there's only so many contracts to go around. So I guess, Dan, my question to you is, what role are sports and live events programming playing in streaming and the success of the services that have those contracts?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the nice thing is we have some numbers over the last couple of weeks. We know that sports, and in particular NFL, is really big as far as viewership. And even though in streaming we don't measure viewership the same way that we do on TV, the fact that we saw Amazon's TNF kickoff had 17.7 million viewers, that's called AMA, average minute audience. YouTube's live stream of the NFL game from Brazil had 19.7. So we're starting to get some numbers now. Even the Netflix Canelo Crawford fight, it peaked at 24 million concurrent streams. So it's interesting to see how those numbers are going up. Now, when compared to NBC Sports Sunday night NFL game, right, Cowboys, Eagles, two big teams, they had an AMA of almost 32 million. So we're still not there in terms of viewership being measured the same way for streaming as we are in TV. But we have enough data to see that these sports events are very important to the platforms, and also have recently gone global. That's an important thing as well. YouTube's exclusive stream was global. NFL on Christmas on Netflix, that's global as well. So that's different than previous years, but sports is where it's at.
And Seth, coming over to you, you mentioned Netflix a couple times in your first answer here. They do have that Christmas game that Dan just mentioned. Also, FIFA, going to be very important for them with the World Cup. How much is that going to give Netflix an edge? Because I think they are still the name that comes top of mind when you say streaming services. Most people say Netflix.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Dan's comments. I think, just top level sports is something that, particularly live sports, that seems to have demand for not just broadcast TV, but for all the streaming services. So I think it's extremely important. I mean, I do think for Netflix, they're so big, so wide, so deep with programming and content, that I view some of these pieces, whether it's sports or video, I come from the music industry. There's always rumors about that coming along. I tend to view that a little bit incrementally, kind of as experiments, if you will. But I think it's been successful. I think Prime's experience with it, for Thursday night has been successful. And I also just think on, this on sports, like if you're a consumer, I find there's so many offerings and it's kind of confusing. And I still to this day do not know where I can get every game in one place. And so I think there's a little bit of an open playing field there. But from a Netflix perspective, I kind of view it as, a solid retention tool as opposed to like their main bread and butter.
All right, we only have about 30 seconds for each of you, but I'd love to just have a final thought of which streaming service you think is best positioned moving forward. Dan, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so there's no one winner. Everyone talks about a streaming war. There's no streaming war. War is an armed conflict. That's the definition. This is competition. Competition is good. We're seeing bundles shift. We're seeing changes in terms of which platforms have which pieces of content, but we're going to have many winners in the space to find however you want to measure their success.
All right, and Seth?
I'm still a fan of Disney because of all the different hits they've gotten there, and even with the recent controversies. So apart from the obvious Netflix, I put my money on Disney Plus to come back.
Well, we thank you both for being with us to talk all things streaming and the importance sports may play as we see more consolidation in this space. That's Dan Rayburn and Seth Shackner. Thank you so much for being with us today on Trading 360.